I should have known it was going to be a bad day the second I found a dead fish nailed to my front door with a note that read, "Next time it'll be your cat." Hi, I'm Tyler. I'm 35, and this isn't the plot of a low-budget Netflix thriller. This is just what it's like living next to Larry and Sheryl, the Bonnie and Clyde of suburban HOA communities. Minus the charm, and plus a hell of a lot of weed smoke and noise complaints. Now let me be clear, I didn't do anything to these people. I bought this house 3 years ago because I wanted peace. A yard for my cat Meatball, and maybe, just maybe, the freedom to barbecue without someone throwing a shoe at me from over the fence. Larry's the kind of guy who mows his lawn at 3 a.m., shirtless in Crocs, blasting Nickelback through a Bluetooth speaker duct taped to his belt like he's trying to summon demons with bad taste. Sheryl thinks the sidewalk is her personal runway and will absolutely scream at your Amazon driver for stepping too close to her potted succulents that she stole from the community center. And no, that wasn't a joke. She actually stole them. I watched it happen. She yanked them out of the planters and shoved them into her tote bag like she was looting the ruins of Pompeii. For the longest time, I tried to be civil. I smiled. I waved. I even returned Larry's screwdriver when he accidentally left it embedded in my garage door after what he described as a throwing accident. But things hit a new low last Tuesday. And by low, I mean subterranean. See, Larry thinks he's a musician. This means he hosts jam sessions with other aging man-babies who confuse rhythm with random noise. They bring over enough equipment to qualify for a small music festival, park on my lawn, and play what can only be described as the audio version of a migraine. At first I thought I was being dramatic, until one of their bass notes shattered a wine glass in my kitchen cabinet. I went over to ask, politely, if they could turn it down. That was my first mistake. Larry opened the door, shirtless again, holding a beer in one hand and a spatula in the other. He stared at me like I was interrupting a UN summit. "Buddy," he said, with the exact tone you use when addressing someone you plan to punch later. "You move in next to Art. You better be ready to hear the canvas scream." I don't know what that means either. That night I called the cops. Not because I'm a narc, but because I'm also not a masochist. Sheryl greeted the officers in a bathrobe and a cigarette she wasn't smoking, just holding for the aesthetic. She told them I was harassing local artists and weaponizing law enforcement against cultural expression. They bought it. They actually bought it. I got a warning for unneighborly behavior. It gets worse. Oh, it gets so much worse. But let's just say that dead fish wasn't the first message I got, and it sure wasn't the last. Something was coming. Something I didn't see yet. And when it hit, I wouldn't be the same. You're not going to believe what happened next. You ever sit in your car in the driveway just not going inside because you know as soon as you open that door, the circus restarts? That was me last Thursday, clutching a lukewarm bag of Chipotle and trying to work up the nerve to enter my own home like a war correspondent prepping for the front lines. And why? Because I already knew what I'd find. The scent of burnt rubber and potpourri, Cheryl's signature scent, was wafting from across the fence like a passive-aggressive fart. Meatball, my poor, traumatized cat, was pressed up against the front window like a feline prisoner begging for asylum. I opened the door and boom, there it was. Someone, and by someone I mean probably Larry, but legally can't prove it, had crammed a stuffed raccoon into my mailbox, wearing a name tag that said, HOA Snitch. It was soaked in something sticky. Cherry cola? Blood? Regret? Honestly, I didn't even want to know. Now I work in IT, remote, I'm indoors a lot. My hobbies include minding my own damn business and occasionally posting sarcastic Yelp reviews. I don't ask for much. But being gaslit by the cast of Florida Man the sitcom has pushed me into new territory. This is psychological warfare, and I was losing. The next day I made the mistake of attending the HOA meeting. Why? Because I still believed in rules, in justice, in the fantasy that the HOA president would maybe say, "Hey, don't threaten your neighbor with dead marine life." Narrator voice. They did not. Turns out Larry is on the board. Oh, and Cheryl's the treasurer, because of course she is. She opened the meeting by accusing me of stealing her garden gnome. I swear on Meatball's luxurious whiskers, I have never touched her hideous gnome, which looks like it was carved by someone on bath salts. She then presented evidence, a blurry Ring camera screenshot that could have been me or Bigfoot or a sleepwalking raccoon, and demanded I be fined. "I move to ban Tyler from planting any more hostile shrubbery," she said. And I knew right then that these people were not merely chaotic. They were strategic, unhinged, but organized. I tried to speak. I stood up, started explaining the noise complaints, the vandalism, the raccoon mailbox incident. They nodded along, took notes, smiled sympathetically. Then Larry handed me a brochure for a conflict resolution drum circle. What followed was the kind of public humiliation usually reserved for reality shows and local news stories. I walked out with my face hot, my soul tired, and a sense of dread growing in my chest like black mold. That night, I caught them on camera. Not just Larry, not just Sheryl. Them. A whole group. In my backyard, with flashlights. Digging. I didn't go outside. I didn't yell. I just stood there watching from the upstairs window, phone in hand, recording every second. I didn't know what they were burying, or unburying, but I knew, with every fiber of my being, this wasn't just about noise complaints anymore. Something was buried, and I was going to find out what. At exactly 2:47 a.m., I made the dumbest decision of my life. I walked out into my own backyard with a flashlight and a golf club because apparently I thought I was in a Scooby-Doo episode instead of a suburban horror story where the monsters wear flip-flops and smoke menthols. The hole was still there. Fresh dirt, sloppy shoveling, no attempt to cover the mess. Like they weren't even trying to hide it. Or worse, like they wanted me to find it. My heart was pounding like it owed someone money, and every tiny sound made me flinch like I was in some budget thriller titled Suburbia, The Reckoning. I aimed the flashlight. What I saw made my mouth go dry. It was a doll. Not a kid's toy. No, this thing was life-sized. Dressed in a thrift store version of my clothes, plaid button-up, khakis, even a fake beard glued on with what looked suspiciously like peanut butter. Its face was hand-drawn with Sharpie. Angry eyebrows, eyes like demonic eggs, and the word snitch scrawled across the forehead in red ink. And that's when I realized the whole thing was a message. They had buried a fake version of me. I backed away slowly, shaking, every instinct telling me to run. But I didn't run. I recorded it. Every awful detail. I wanted evidence. Because at this point, I didn't trust the police, the HOA, or even my own sense of reality anymore. The next morning, I sent the video to the local PD. You'd think this would be the turning point. The part in the movie where the authorities finally take the unhinged neighbors seriously and move in to shut it down. But this isn't a movie. This is real life, and in real life, the officer who showed up to investigate was Larry's cousin. I swear on everything holy and caffeinated, he looked me in the eye, chuckled, and said, "Sounds like a prank to me." "Don't take it so personal." "Would it still be a prank if I buried a fake Larry in my yard?" I asked, dead serious. He blinked. "Well, now you're talking threats." Oh, the irony. After he left, doing absolutely nothing beyond strongly advising me to consider neighborhood mediation, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the wall, trying to remember what peace felt like. Then the doorbell rang. A package. No return address. Inside, a single flip-flop, one of those ugly brown ones Larry wears everywhere like it's still 2003 and we're all on our way to a Jimmy Buffett concert. Taped to it, a Polaroid of Meatball, my cat, sleeping peacefully on the windowsill. Only the window wasn't my window. It was their window. I ran upstairs, heart racing so hard I couldn't breathe. Meatball was gone. I screamed his name, tore the house apart, checked every closet, every drawer like he'd magically turn up playing hide and seek. But I knew. They had him. They had my cat. This wasn't war anymore. This was personal. By sunrise, I was sitting on the curb in a hoodie and pajama pants, sipping coffee like it was morphine, and staring across the street at the House of Doom, aka Larry and Sheryl's domain of psychological terrorism, trying to figure out how exactly my life had become a bad true crime podcast. No movement, no noise. Just their American flag flapping in the wind like a middle finger to common decency. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Meatball trapped inside their moldy garage, sandwiched between expired Costco meatballs and old Tool albums. The guy is a neutered rescue with social anxiety and a deep-seated fear of loud noises. So naturally, Larry blasting Metallica at 2 a.m. was probably making his tiny feline soul detach from his body. I considered knocking. I actually stood up, walked halfway across the street, and got as far as the cracked pavement in front of their driveway. But then I heard it. Sheryl's voice. Somewhere in the backyard, yelling at someone or something about fertilizer and vibes. I froze, slowly reversed course like a cartoon burglar, and retreated to my house, dignity dragging behind me like a leash without a cat. Plan B. I texted my neighbor Pam. She's 63, owns 6 decorative birdhouses, and a telescope she swears is just for astronomy. But more importantly, she hates Larry and Sheryl with the kind of quiet, simmering rage usually reserved for cable providers and wet socks. I asked if she had seen Meatball. She responded instantly, didn't see him, but I did see Sheryl yelling at a broom for cursing her tomatoes. I thanked her, then sat there stewing. I didn't want to escalate things. I wanted to believe there was some twisted explanation for everything. Maybe they found Meatball wandering. Maybe they were just holding him until they could return him. Maybe, just maybe, I was being paranoid. Then a second text came in, from an unknown number. A picture of Meatball, wrapped in a baby blanket on someone's floral couch. Next to it, a note written on the back of a Pizza Hut receipt. He's safe. You need to reflect. Neighbors are a mirror. S. A mirror? A mirror? Was this a ransom or a self-help retreat? I did what any rational adult would do. I stormed into my kitchen, grabbed the Sharpie I used to label leftovers, and wrote, "Return the cat, you absolute lunatics," in all caps across a cardboard box lid. I marched across the street, slammed it into their mailbox, and marched back without even looking behind me. Petty? Yes. Productive? Maybe. Therapeutic? Absolutely. The rest of the day was weirdly calm. No baseline earthquakes, no Sheryl yelling about mercury in her yoga mats, no new holes in the yard. I half expected them to retaliate immediately, but the silence was almost more unsettling, like the calm before the next storm. Then, around 8 p.m., I heard a familiar scratch at the front door. I opened it slowly, bracing for a glitter bomb or a passive-aggressive fruit basket. It was Meatball. Wrapped in the same baby blanket from the photo, a tiny bell tied around his neck with a note clipped to his collar that simply read, "He purrs when we play smooth jazz." I didn't know whether to cry or scream, but I did know one thing for sure. Whatever game they were playing, it wasn't over. It was just getting weirder. Meatball wouldn't stop staring at the wall. I mean it. Just sat there in my living room, eyes locked on a blank patch of drywall like it owed him rent, tail twitching like Morse code for, "We've seen some things, man." He didn't touch his food, didn't blink, just watched. That's when I knew. Whatever Larry and Sheryl had done while he was in their house, it had changed him. I called the vet the next morning, not because he was physically hurt, no scratches, no signs of injury, but his energy, off. Like someone had replaced my mildly judgmental, emotionally unavailable cat with a haunted Build-A-Bear filled with spite and jazz memories. While waiting for the appointment, I decided to do a little digging. Not in the backyard, no way I was going near that trauma pit again, but into the HOA records. You know, the ones they swear are publicly accessible, but hide behind a login portal that looks like it was designed in 1998 by a caffeinated raccoon. After 20 minutes of resetting passwords and clicking forgotten tabs, I hit gold. Larry wasn't just on the HOA board. He was the HOA board. The president had stepped down last year after a disagreement over squirrel traps. The treasurer mysteriously moved to Arizona. Larry and Sheryl had voted themselves into power during a special emergency meeting that only 2 people attended. Want to guess who? They controlled the neighborhood, the fines, the rules, the landscaping regulations, the decorative flag policy, all of it. I sat there, rereading the minutes from their last meeting, which included an official motion to ban lawn gnomes taller than 12 inches and require neighborly attitudes during trash night. It was equal parts absurd and terrifying. They'd weaponized bureaucracy. I wasn't just dealing with bad neighbors. I was dealing with petty dictators who ruled through code violations and passive-aggressive signage. Then came the knock. I opened the door slowly, still in pajama pants, holding a cup of stale coffee like it was a weapon. Sheryl stood there, in a full-length red velvet cloak, holding a plate of cookies. "We sensed your energy was misaligned," she said, smiling with every tooth like she'd practiced in front of a mirror called Menace. "These are lavender cayenne snickerdoodles, for harmony." "Is there cayenne in my harmony?" I asked. "Just a pinch," she said, then leaned in so close I could smell her essential oils and unresolved trauma. Larry has a vision for this street, a greater vision, and we think you've been resisting it. I think I'm resisting food poisoning, I said, not taking the plate. She stared at me for a moment. Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes darkened just enough to make my skin crawl. Resistance is natural, she said, until it's not. Then she turned around and walked off barefoot, dragging the cloak behind her like she was auditioning for the role of evil grandma in a soap opera about herbs and gaslighting. I tossed the cookies in the trash. That night, I checked my mail and found a letter. No stamp. No return address. Just a typed note on embossed stationery. You are no longer in good standing. The next phase begins now. Consider your gutters. My gutters? What does that even mean? I didn't know. But I had a feeling I was about to find out. And it wasn't going to be pretty. It turns out, consider your gutters wasn't a threat. It was a prophecy. The next morning, I walked outside with my coffee, half expecting to find a flamingo shrine or a burning effigy of my mailbox. Instead, I found Larry standing on my roof, in flip-flops, with a leaf blower. "Morning, sport!" he yelled, like we were teammates instead of unwilling co-stars in an escalating psychological comedy. Your gutters were crying for help. I'm answering the call. There were so many things wrong with that sentence, I didn't even know where to start. First, how did he get on my roof? Second, why did he bring his own ladder? And third, who the hell leaf blows at 7:12 a.m. on a Sunday? I stood there in stunned silence, coffee slowly lowering like a flag at half-mast, as he cheerfully blasted leaves off my perfectly clean roof and onto my neighbor Pam's begonias. She watched from her porch in a pink bathrobe, eyebrows halfway up her forehead, and a mug that said, "World's okayest grandma," gripped like a grenade. I called up to him. "Larry, get off my house." He cupped a hand to his ear. "What's that? You're welcome?" I could have screamed. Instead, I did the adult thing, went inside, closed all the blinds, and texted Pam. I think he's unhinged, and not in the fun way. Pam responded, "I think we're in a documentary, and no one told us." I spent the next hour trying to figure out if calling the cops would somehow get me fined for interfering with community beautification efforts. The man had turned my personal space into a public playground, and the HOA still hadn't responded to my complaints. Probably because the HOA was currently on my roof pretending to be a suburban Mary Poppins with anger issues. By noon, he was gone, just vanished. Ladder and all, like he'd been absorbed by the shingles. No note, no explanation, just a trail of sunflower seeds leading off my property like Hansel and Gretel, but with more protein. I checked the gutters, still clean, probably cleaner than they'd ever been. That night, I got another note. Taped to my recycling bin. Different font this time, serif, bold. "We take care of our own here. You could learn something from that." I wanted to be mad, but mostly I was tired. Tired in that deep, soul-level way that comes from knowing your sanity is being slowly eroded by someone who owns a novelty air horn and believes in crystal therapy. I sat down with Meatball, who had finally started acting like himself again, judging me from atop the fridge with his usual royal disdain. And I realized something. This wasn't about gutters, or gnomes, or cookie diplomacy. It was about power. Control. Larry and Sheryl ran the street like a cult with an Etsy store. But every tyrant had a weakness, and I was going to find theirs. After all, I now had something better than a strategy. I had Pam. Pam didn't blink when I told her the plan. She just took a long sip from her oversized mug of grandma juice, which I'm 98% sure was Pinot Grigio in a tea disguise, and said, "Finally, I've been waiting for this day since Sheryl accused me of hexing her begonias." By the end of that conversation, we were no longer just two annoyed neighbors. We were co-conspirators, allies, resistance fighters in a war no one else seemed to notice was happening. We called it Operation HOA Shall Collapse. Step 1? Surveillance. Not spy-level surveillance. We didn't have drones or infrared or a van with wires sticking out of it. We had Pam's telescope, a half-busted pair of binoculars, and her niece Chloe's old baby monitor, which I may or may not have zip-tied to a potted plant outside their open living room window. What we discovered in 48 hours could fill a novel titled, How to Ruin a Neighborhood Without Technically Breaking the Law. Every Tuesday night, Larry held what he called community strategy sessions. which were less about gardening and more about plotting HOA citations like a petty Bond villain. I kid you not. He had a corkboard covered in Post-its with names like Tyler, exterior lighting too bright, and Pam, wind chimes excessive. There were arrows, timelines, color-coded pins. And then there was the binder. Sheryl's binder. It was hot pink and labeled Behavioral Profiles. Inside were tabs for everyone on the street with photos and notes. Mine said, Anti-authority, watches from upstairs window, possibly unstable. Cat is an enabler. Pam said, Keep secrets, distracts with charm, dangerous when provoked. Honestly, not wrong. We took pictures of every page we could. Pam narrated each one like she was filming a nature documentary. Here we see the suburban sociopath in his natural habitat, logging his neighbor's recycling habits like a sanctimonious raccoon with a clipboard. But the real gem? Page 17. A flyer, an early draft, of a neighborhood rezoning petition. They weren't just trying to run the block, they were trying to push out certain non-compliant homeowners, aka anyone who didn't kiss their ring or attend Sheryl's full moon jam sessions, and they'd already started. That explained the sudden burst of violations, the weird visits, the cookie threats. They were soft-launching a campaign to squeeze people out with fines, gossip, and strategic harassment. I wasn't paranoid. I was targeted. By midnight, we had enough intel to make even Larry sweat. But we weren't done. Step 2? Leverage. We sent a friendly anonymous email to the HOA mailing list. Subject line: Is our neighborhood becoming a surveillance state? Attached were screenshots, not everything, just enough to raise eyebrows. A few excerpts from Sheryl's profiles, the corkboard madness, and a quote from Larry complaining that Gary's lawn gnome is sending signals to the crows. No accusations, no names, just questions. Within 12 hours, it had spread like wildfire. Gary, who hadn't spoken to anyone in months, posted, I knew they were watching, in the group chat. Debbie from 2 doors down added, Sheryl once called my roses too provocative. I knew something was off. The tide was turning. But Sheryl, she didn't flinch. She doubled down. The next day, a sign went up in their yard. Some of us care about order. If that scares you, look inward. And behind it, a new camera, facing my house. This wasn't war anymore. This was chess. And I had just moved my queen. The camera had a red blinking light. One of those slow, taunting blinks that says, yes, I see you, and no, you can't stop me. It was bolted to a makeshift wooden post jammed into Larry and Sheryl's front yard like some kind of suburban scarecrow. And it wasn't just pointed at my house anymore. It was zoomed in. On my bedroom window. I called the non-emergency police line. Again. Explained everything. Again. And got the same hollow response. Well, sir, if the camera is on their property and not recording inside your home, there's not much we can do. Cool. So basically, unless they crawl into my air vents and live stream my dreams, I'm on my own. That night, Pam came over armed with a bottle of something French and deeply alcoholic. We sat in my living room, meatball curled between us like a grumpy little general, and laid it all out. This isn't surveillance, she said. It's psychological warfare. They're not watching you because they care about what you do. They're watching you so you never forget they can. She was right. It wasn't about catching me doing anything wrong. It was about making me live like I already had. That's when Pam dropped the real bomb. Sheryl used to be a paralegal, not a rumor. Confirmed. Back in the early 2000s. She got fired for forging signatures on medical liability documents for her boss's shady malpractice firm. So yeah, that's who's running our HOA. We spent the next 2 hours digging through county records, court databases, even local newspaper archives. Found a blur of lawsuits, old complaints, and buried deep, a public hearing transcript from a zoning dispute in another neighborhood. Different city, same names, Larry and Sheryl. They moved out the day after they lost the vote. Pattern? Oh, absolutely. I barely slept that night. Every shadow on the wall felt like it was blinking at me. I kept thinking about that camera. That binder, the notes about my cat, the weird community strategy sessions, the fake burial in my yard. And then, around 4 a.m., I heard it. The door handle turning. Not forcefully, not breaking in, just testing. Slowly. I grabbed the bat I kept under my bed, rushed to the door, flung it open. Nothing. No one. But at the base of the steps, a package. No address. Just a single sheet of paper taped to the top. You are not in control here. Inside the box, a motion sensor light. The same one that used to be mounted on the side of my house. They'd stolen it, removed it from my property, and dropped it off like a dead bird from a smug cat. They weren't just watching anymore. They were taking pieces of my life and feeding them back to me like threats disguised as favors. I didn't go back to sleep. I couldn't, because I knew what this was now. It wasn't about property lines or HOA rules. This was personal. This was a game. And they had no idea I'd finally figured out how to win it. It started with silence. Not the usual silence, like when Larry passed out on his porch in a lawn chair after too many Coors and conspiracy rants. No, this was different. No lights, no music, no midnight arguing about mulch ratios, no Sheryl screaming at the moon with a fistful of rosemary, just nothing. I noticed it first Thursday morning. Garbage day. Their bins weren't out. For the first time in 3 years, Larry's overflowing monster of a trash can wasn't blocking half the sidewalk like a territorial raccoon nest. I stood there holding my coffee, staring across the street, waiting for some sign of life. Nothing. No camera light blinking, no curtain twitching, no Sheryl stomping barefoot in her robe to yell at Pam's wind chimes. By Friday, Pam noticed too. She texted me. Think they're dead or on a cult retreat? I replied, hopefully both. But by Saturday, it stopped being funny. The mailbox, normally stuffed with junk and conspiracy newsletters, was overflowing. Packages sat untouched on the porch. We waited for Sheryl to appear in her cloak and call the mailman a thief. But she didn't. So I did something reckless. I walked across the street and knocked. No answer. I peeked through the front window. No curtains. No furniture. No anything. Just bare floors, blank walls, a faint smell of lavender and mildew, and a single pair of flip-flops abandoned in the hallway. It looked like no one had ever lived there. I don't mean it was clean. I mean it was empty, like it had been staged for sale. No signs of life. No signs of the chaos they'd built over 3 years. The pink binder? Gone. The camera? Disconnected. The corkboard? Nothing but a faded rectangle on the wall where it used to hang. I tried the door. Locked. Pam joined me 10 minutes later with her niece Chloe, who had a friend in real estate. She made a quick call. Here's the kicker. The house had been listed 2 days ago. Anonymous seller. Cash only. No contact name. Just a P.O. box in a different state. They were gone. Just gone. No goodbye. No drama. No final HOA sermon. Just a vanished house. A vanishing act. And a whole neighborhood full of people looking at each other like they'd collectively hallucinated the last 3 years. By Sunday, rumors started. Some said they fled the country. Others swore they were part of a deep HOA network and had been relocated to run another block. One guy on Nextdoor posted that he saw black SUVs take them away. Another claimed he saw Larry transform into a crow and fly into the woods. But I know what I saw. Nothing. No moving truck, no boxes, no farewell. Just a hollow shell of a house and the eerie feeling that maybe, just maybe, Larry and Sheryl had never been real at all. Pam put it best when she said, I feel like we kicked the devil out and now we're not sure if we won or if we just haven't seen what's coming next. And I couldn't argue, because even though the house was empty, the camera was back.